On October 14, 1943, at 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany, a German fighter pilot recorded his 17th heavy bomber destroyed in his logbook. A B-17 Flying Fortress spiraled earthward, trailing black smoke, while remaining fortresses struggled to maintain formation as their gunners fired desperately at German fighters that struck and vanished before effective response was possible. The mathematics of aerial combat were brutally simple. German fighters could choose their moment, attack from advantageous positions, and escape before bomber gunners could respond effectively. Without fighter escorts, American bombers were vulnerable targets. That morning, 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses had crossed into German airspace attempting to destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. By sunset, 60 would never return to England, with another 17 damaged beyond repair. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. The Americans called it Black Thursday, the darkest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. Neither side knew that this moment of German triumph would be among their last. Within 4 months, everything would change. German tactical superiority in late 1943. The German fighter pilots of late 1943 had every reason for confidence. Pilots such as Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, Hermann Georg Peter Ader, and Major Walter Dahl had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit bomber formation weaknesses, refined through months of successful combat. The standard American combat box formation consisted of 18 to 21 bombers arranged in the three-dimensional defensive pattern. While each B-17 was equipped with 13.5 caliber machine guns, theoretically covering every angle of approach, German pilots had identified critical weaknesses: blind spots in the nose, limited ammunition supplies, and the psychological impact of sustained attacks. Hermann Heinz Nuck, commanding 5/JG-11, had perfected the head-on attack exploiting the B-17's weakest defensive position. On February 26, 1943, he shot down his first heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator named Maisie, and by October had destroyed 16 more. His technique was precise. Approach from 12 o'clock high, dive through the formation at 400 miles per hour, fire a 2-second burst at the cockpit and engines, then break away before top turret gunners could track. The statistics supported German confidence. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission on August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe shot down 60 bombers, representing 16% of the attacking force. American losses were so severe that deep penetration raids were suspended for weeks. When they resumed with the second Schweinfurt raid on October 14th, the results were even more devastating. 77 bombers lost or written off, with over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. Major Egon Mayer, group commander of 3/JG-11, developed the company front attack. 8 FW-190s approaching line abreast, saturating the bomber's defensive fire with multiple simultaneous targets. The psychological impact was devastating. American gunners, faced with 8 fighters approaching at a combined closing speed of 600 miles per hour, had mere seconds to choose targets and often shot at nothing in their panic. The root of American vulnerability lay in simple physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 had the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the primary American escort fighter, had a combat radius of only 375 miles with drop tanks, enough to reach the German border but no further. The twin-engined Lockheed P-38 Lightning could fly further, but suffered mechanical problems at high altitude in European cold, with engines failing and controls freezing. This limitation meant American bombers flew the most dangerous portion of their missions over the heart of Germany completely alone. German fighters simply waited beyond the range of Allied escorts, then attacked with concentrated force. Luftwaffe pilots called the point where Allied fighters turned back the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, described the tactic in recorded accounts. The Luftwaffe tracked bomber streams on radar, calculating exactly where escorts would turn back. The moment the escorts left, they attacked. The bombers knew what was coming and would tighten their formations. The escort limitation created deadly arithmetic. A B-17 formation might face 4 hours of combat over enemy territory, but only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German fighters could attack, land, refuel, rearm, and attack again while bombers were still struggling homeward. Some Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 sorties against a single raid, multiplying their combat effectiveness. The P-51 Mustang's development began not as an American initiative, but as a British request. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation seeking additional P-40 fighters. Instead, North American proposed building an entirely new fighter in just 120 days. The result was the NA-73X, which first flew on October 26, 1940, a remarkable achievement in rapid development. Initially powered by an Allison V1710 engine, the early Mustang excelled at low altitude, but struggled above 15,000 feet, precisely where bomber escort was needed. The RAF used these early variants for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack, roles where their exceptional range and low-altitude performance proved valuable. The transformation that would change the air war came from an unlikely marriage of American and British engineering. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-engined Mustang and immediately recognized its potential. The airframe was superb, aerodynamically cleaner than even the Spitfire. What it needed was a better engine. Harker proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same 2-stage supercharged engine that powered the latest Spitfires. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942, and the results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 miles per hour. More importantly, performance above 20,000 feet transformed from marginal to exceptional, and service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. The marriage of American mass production capability with British engine technology had created something neither nation could have achieved alone. Revolutionary range and performance. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary was not just its performance, but its range. The secret lay in 3 factors: exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing, internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons compared to the P-47's 305 gallons, but in a much lighter, more efficient airframe, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance degradation. The laminator flow wing, designed by North American's Edgar Schmude, maintained smooth airflow much further back along its surface than conventional wings. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency. While a P-47 burned 100 gallons per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 consumed only 65 gallons at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 miles. With 108-gallon tanks introduced in March 1944, radius stretched to 850 miles, enough to reach Berlin, engage in combat for 20 minutes, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter in the world could match this combination of range and performance. First combat operations. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51Bs in November 1943. Based at Boxted in Essex, they were technically part of the 9th Air Force, but were immediately tasked with supporting 8th Air Force strategic bombing missions. Their commander, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had just days to convert his pilots from P-47s to the new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later command the 353rd Fighter Group, flew one of the first orientation flights and later recalled that the moment he lifted off, he knew they had something special. The Mustang handled with exceptional responsiveness compared to previous fighters and could maintain flight for extended periods. Major Klaus Mitusch, commanding 3/JG-26, recognized the strategic implications immediately after landing from a December 30th interception where Mustangs had pursued his fighters all the way to their landing approach. He reportedly told his pilots that the air war had fundamentally changed and their sanctuary no longer existed. March 4, 1944, at 25,000 feet above Brandenburg, marked a watershed moment. Through scattered clouds below, the sprawling outline of Berlin was clearly visible, the capital of the Reich, the heart of Nazi Germany, the city that Hermann Göring had sworn would never see enemy aircraft. Above it, in perfect formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers, and surrounding them, weaving protective patterns, were scores of single-engine fighters bearing American markings. The first American fighter escort to Berlin represented more than a tactical achievement. It was a psychological demolition of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 1,100-mile round trip. The 4th Fighter Group had received their P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, and just 4 days later accomplished what German leadership had deemed impossible. For Luftwaffe pilots rising to intercept, the sight was incomprehensible. They had been told Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. It was too far, impossible for single-engine aircraft. Yet there they were, fresh and aggressive, after flying 500 miles, while German defenders were the ones running low on fuel after just taking off. The combat that followed was savage. The Luftwaffe committed over 200 fighters to defend Berlin, but they faced not exhausted bomber gunners, but fresh, eager Mustang pilots with altitude advantage and superior aircraft. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 victories. More significantly, numerous German attacks on bombers were broken up before they could press home. For American pilots, the P-51B represented a revelation in fighter design. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would become one of the war's top Mustang aces, described the aircraft as providing everything pilots dreamed of: speed to catch any German fighter, maneuverability to dogfight with them, and range to go anywhere the bombers went. The cockpit of a P-51B was cramped but efficiently designed. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that provided excellent forward visibility, unlike the radial-engined P-47 that blocked much of the forward view. The bubble canopy of the later P-51D would improve visibility further, but even the B-model greenhouse canopy offered good all-around vision. Lieutenant Robert Powell of the 352nd Fighter Group recalled the physical demands. 6 hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000 feet. Mouths would be cotton dry from the oxygen, backs aching from the parachute and dinghy pack pilots sat on, necks sore from constantly swiveling to check for enemy fighters. However, having the capability to do the job made all the difference. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin triggered an immediate crisis in Luftwaffe High Command. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring initially refused to believe the reports. When confronted with proof, gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showing P-51s over the capital, he reportedly expressed shock. While this specific quote lacks primary source documentation and may be apocryphal, it captures the genuine shock that German leadership experienced. The tactical implications were devastating. Every assumption about German defense had been based on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond escort range. Training fields, assembly areas, and aircraft factories had been located in central Germany specifically because they were thought safe from fighter attack. Now American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, and escort bombers to any target in the Reich. Major Günther Röhl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic shift. The Mustang did not just extend the bomber offensive, but transformed it. The Luftwaffe could no longer choose when and where to fight. The Americans brought the battle to them on their terms whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Storm groups were formed, heavily armed and armored FW-190s designed to break through fighter screens and attack bombers at close range. However, these lumbering assault fighters were easy prey for nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried mass attacks with entire groups attacking simultaneously, but American fighters had the numbers and performance to counter even these. February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, demonstrated the transformed dynamics of the air war. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production, with P-51s providing escort throughout. In 6 days, the Americans flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties, losing 226 bombers but claiming over 500 German fighters destroyed. More critically, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable pilots. The American strategy had shifted from simply bombing targets to actively seeking out aerial combat. General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, rather than staying close to bombers. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the new aggressive tactics. Pilots would escort bombers to the target, but once they dropped their bombs, fighters would go looking for trouble, diving to the deck, shooting up airfields, catching German fighters landing or taking off. The emphasis on pilots led to a pay increase for aircrew, mental and physical, to meet the demands of extended missions. The mathematics of attrition now favored the Allies overwhelmingly. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. In February, 2,121 pilots. In March, 2,115 pilots. These losses included many irreplaceable experienced veterans with years of combat experience. American losses, while significant, could be replaced by massive training programs producing 11,000 new pilots monthly. Technical superiority. The Mustang represented more than just extended range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority. The K-14 computing gun sight, introduced in late 1944, gave Mustang pilots a significant advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated lead based on range and rate of turn, dramatically improving accuracy. The Mustang's 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannon, offered advantages in ammunition capacity and rate of fire. A P-51 carried 1,880 rounds total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In a prolonged dogfight, American pilots could afford to take shots that German pilots could not. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, noted the qualitative difference. The Mustang was not just another fighter, but a weapon system. Everything about it was optimized for its mission. Germany had excellent aircraft, but nothing that combined all elements so effectively. The human cost. Behind the statistics lay human tragedy on an unprecedented scale. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teens, fought desperate battles 6 miles above the earth in temperatures of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The fortunate ones died instantly. Others endured horrific burns, traumatic amputations from cannon shells, or slow deaths in parachutes riddled with bullet holes. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched its pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire. Wisner could see him trying to beat out flames on his flight suit as he descended. There was nothing anyone could do. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7 described the changing nature of combat. In 1943, they were knights of the air, jousting with bombers in something approaching fair combat. By 1944, they were being pursued relentlessly. Mustangs would follow them down to their airfields, circle overhead while they tried to land, then attack. There was no safety anywhere. Psychological impact. The psychological toll was devastating. Luftwaffe pilots, who had been confident in 1943, became increasingly fatalistic by mid-1944. Letters home, censored by German authorities but preserved in archives, revealed deepening despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944 that pilots took off knowing most would not return. The Americans were everywhere, always above them, always with more fuel and more ammunition. Strategic bombing campaign. As spring turned to summer in 1944, the Mustang's range enabled a strategic campaign that would cripple the German war machine. The systematic destruction of oil production. Synthetic oil plants at Leuna, Politz, and Brooks, previously beyond escort range, now faced regular, precision attacks with full fighter protection. The impact was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to 30,000 tons in July, and just 10,000 tons in September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated entirely. New pilots arrived at combat units with as few as 50 hours total flight time, compared to American pilots with 300 to 400 hours. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-7, described the crisis. Germany had the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, but could barely fuel them for combat missions. He watched helplessly as dozens of these superb aircraft sat idle while Mustangs roamed freely overhead. D-Day, June 6, 1944. June 6, 1944 demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France, compared to 14,674 Allied sorties. Only 2 German fighters appeared over the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had established such dominance that the invasion proceeded under an aerial umbrella virtually unchallenged by German aviation. Oberst Lieutenant Joseph Peps Priller, commanding JG-26, flew one of those 2 sorties with his wingman Unteroffizier Heinz Waderchick, making a single strafing run along Sword Beach. Priller later described the mission as suicide disguised as duty. They survived only because Allied fighters were too surprised to react to the lone pair of FW-190s. Expanded combat roles. The Mustang's role extended beyond escort to active fighter bombing. P-51 pilots became adept at train busting, destroying locomotives with their .50 caliber guns. A single Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets in addition to its guns, making it a formidable ground attack aircraft. Charles Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-109s in a single mission. However, he also described the moral complexity. Pilots went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved, including strafing trains, knowing they might be carrying civilians. It was total war, and the Mustang gave them the capability to take that war anywhere in Germany. German technological response. Germany's technological response came in the form of revolutionary jet fighters, the Me-262 and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. The Me-262, capable of 540 miles per hour, was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. In the hands of experienced pilots, it could slash through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react. Yet even these technological marvels could not reverse the tide. Oberst General Adolf Galland, flying an Me-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft, but recognized the futility. They were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For every Me-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs, and Mustangs could loiter over German airfields, attacking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Mustang pilots learned to exploit these weaknesses. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shot down 2 Me-262s on October 7, 1944, by catching them in the landing pattern. The jets, low on fuel and with throttles reduced for landing, were helpless against the diving Mustangs. Final statistics and impact. By early 1945, the arithmetic of air combat had become impossible for Germany. The United States produced 15,486 P-51s during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups equipped primarily with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters on any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did were often manned by teenagers with minimal training. The kill ratios reflected this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 aerial victories, all in Mustangs. He observed that by 1945, it was not combat, but execution. Pilots would find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land. The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone. Post-war testimony. After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided revealing testimony about the Mustang's impact. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland wrote in his memoirs that the P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, Germany controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, they never regained the initiative. Major Heinz Nook, who survived the war with 33 victories, was more direct. The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. Germany went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months. Perhaps most poignant was the testimony of younger pilots who entered combat late in the war. They flew their first missions with minimal training, facing experienced American pilots in superior aircraft. One captured pilot stated he flew his first combat mission in November 1944 with 55 hours total flight time. On his third mission, he saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. He knew then that Germany had lost not just the war, but the sky itself. Strategic contribution. The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. By enabling deep penetration raids with acceptable losses, it allowed the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Wehrmacht's Achilles heel, was reduced to 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, preventing movement of troops, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though maintained at high levels through dispersal, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes or trained pilots to man them. General Carl Spaatz, commanding United States strategic air forces in Europe, stated that the P-51 was the decisive weapon system of the European air war. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power. Human transformation. The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. German pilots who had entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the war, if they survived, as changed men. Many spoke of specific moments when they realized the war was lost, almost always connected to their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany. Some German pilots experienced a different transformation, from enemy to admirer. Many Luftwaffe veterans, after witnessing American material superiority and humane treatment of prisoners, questioned everything they had been told about their enemies. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and reality proved devastating to morale and ideology alike. Legacy and influence. The Mustangs represented a watershed in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for decades. Its laminar flow wing demonstrated the potential for dramatic drag reduction. The integration of British engine technology with American airframe design established a model for international cooperation that would continue through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievement changed fundamental assumptions about fighter aircraft. Pre-war doctrine held that fighters were short-range point defense weapons. The P-51 proved that fighters could be strategic weapons, capable of projecting power hundreds of miles from base. This concept would influence everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters capable of global deployment with aerial refueling. Final statistics. The final statistics of the Mustang's impact are staggering. Total Mustangs produced 15,486. Enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat in Europe, 4,950. Enemy aircraft destroyed on ground, 4,131. Locomotives destroyed, 9,254. Combat sorties flown, 213,873. Combat hours flown, 1,344,420. Operational losses, 2,520. Kill-to-loss ratio in air combat exceeded 11 to 1. This kill-to-loss ratio was unprecedented in aerial warfare. However, the true impact cannot be measured in statistics alone. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, enabled the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, if not years. The transformation timeline. The transformation from German laughter at unescorted bombers to complete aerial impotence occurred with stunning rapidity. October 1943, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany, shooting down bombers at will. March 1944, Mustangs were escorting bombers to Berlin. June 1944, the Luftwaffe was combat ineffective. April 1945, it had ceased to exist as a fighting force. This transformation was not gradual, it was catastrophic. The Luftwaffe did not slowly decline, it collapsed. The appearance of Mustangs deep over Germany triggered a cascade of defeats from which recovery proved impossible. Each lost pilot could not be adequately replaced. Each destroyed aircraft reduced training capability. Each successful escort mission emboldened Allied planners to strike deeper, harder, and more frequently. Pilot loss statistics. German pilot losses tell the story. 1943, 2,976 pilots lost. 1944, 12,037 pilots lost. 1945, January to May, 4,238 pilots lost. Average pilot experience plummeted. 1943, 250 plus flight hours before combat. Early 1944, 150 hours. Late 1944, 80 hours. 1945, 40 to 50 hours. Psychological achievement. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest achievement was psychological. It shattered the myth of German technological superiority, demonstrated American industrial capability, and proved that democracy could produce better weapons than dictatorship. German pilots who had laughed at American bombers in 1943 were by 1945 refusing to fly suicide missions against Mustang-escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe pilots indoctrinated in Nazi ideology experienced cognitive dissonance when confronting American material superiority. Everything they had been taught about racial superiority, about German technical prowess, and about American weakness was contradicted by the elegant, powerful fighter that dominated their own homeland. 1985 reunion. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. The conversations revealed the lasting impact of the Mustang on both sides. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16.25 aerial victories, sat across from Oberst Gunther Rall, Germany's third highest-scoring ace. Rall raised his glass in a toast to the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. Germany had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and was fighting over its homeland. But the Americans had the Mustang, and that made all the difference. Walter Schuck, who had transitioned from FW-190s to Me-262 jets, added that Germany went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force has ever experienced such a complete reversal. Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Messerschmitt Me-262 crash in April 1945, reflected that Germany laughed at American bombers in 1943 because they could not imagine that America could produce a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin. The P-51 Mustang taught them the danger of underestimating one's enemies. When asked when they knew the war was lost, It was that day in March 1944 when they looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. They had already lost. Historical significance. The transformation from German pilots laughing at unescorted American bombers to experiencing complete defeat represents one of the most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from predator to prey, from confident to condemned. The P-51 Mustang was the catalyst for this transformation, but it represented something larger: American industrial might, democratic cooperation between allies, and the power of technological innovation driven by necessity rather than ideology. German pilots who had been taught that American democracy made the nation weak discovered instead a society capable of unprecedented unity and production. The laughter of German pilots in October 1943 was based on reasonable assessment of technical limitations.